How are you doing, everyone? Thank you for coming on by today, and since the last comparison did fairly well, I thought why not do another video comparing a moment from the original series and an extremely iconic one, this time from episode 95 to the new remade scenes from Dragon Ball Z Resurrection F Future Trunks Special Edition. Yes, that name is overly long. And staff-wise on 95 you have some well-known names like Minoru Maeda as animation supervisor, as well as key animators such as Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru and Masaki Sato, who just steals the show in this episode. And as director we have the legendary Shigeyasu Yamauchi, and I have no doubt some of you have no idea who that is, but without going off on a tangent of why he is a stellar director, he was the storyboard and director of some fan favorite movies like movie 9 and 13. And with the remake, Yuya Takahashi is up animating the transformation, and Tadayoshi Yamamoru as director and animation supervisor. And even though you have two different approaches due to circumstances, that being one with Z it's a weekly episode so there is more filler, therefore scenes are lengthened, whereas with the special it's more so a flashback reel, so everything is much more compact and short as a whole and is more faithful to the manga. But regardless, it serves as a great example that diverging from the source material and adding filler, if done right, can enhance a scene, which I strongly believe it did due to the fact that this transformation is so iconic and well remembered decades later. And even though I might prefer the original, I'm not going to do the DBZ equals best, new equals bad, as it's always a good practice to analyze the positives and negatives of both media. And before we begin, like usual on this channel, the featured artist today is Phlox.ig. This guy's work is always appearing on my feed, whether Instagram or Twitter, and for good reason. With great expressions, poses, and his ability to nail Shintani's art style, as well as replicating many others like from Dragon Ball Legends, he definitely deserves a follow. And if you want a chance to feature in a video, use this hashtag and tag me on the social media platforms linked in the description. And now back to the video. So first up, let's analyze episode 95 and the lead up to the transformation with Krillin's initial shock by Yukio Ebisawa to start us off, who was definitely one of the weaker staff members in the series. However, the artwork here is fine with a nice shocked face of Krillin, very reminiscent in many details to the manga, with the character art looking satisfactory throughout this portion, thanks more so though to Maeda's corrections. Yamauchi also opts to extend this portion rather than just Krillin looking up and seeing Frieza straight away. The shot switches to Gohan and Piccolo with some repeated frames of Krillin in between. Now, I'm sure some might not find this addition necessary, but it works well with the build up to his reveal, and thereafter some waves crashing against the rocks before we get another shocked expression of Gohan by Toshiyuki Kano, who, if you haven't heard of, he had a hand in animating another iconic moment, that being Vegeta's sacrifice in 237. And overall, the character art here is good, his style of shading carries depth. I also especially like his Piccolo and Frieza, and kinda like before, instead of just showing Frieza in one go, there are extra shots added. But for this sequence, again, I think it works fine in terms of build-up, rather than just snapping straight to him. And through Yamauchi's framing of Frieza by opting to not show a full body reveal but focusing on certain parts like his foot, his tail, what's left of it, and his hand, additionally with characters' reactions placed in between, it definitely complements the air of mystery and tension already being built before the final reveal. Moving on, we have some reused shots, and then we get to Frieza firing a ki blast to Piccolo, with Tomiya Lighter animating this next portion. Although simple, I really like the effects work for the beam. The glowing red and the small shards of light, so to say, are quite aesthetically pleasing. Furthermore, the framing here by Yamauchi is excellent, with this low angle shot looking up, and with Frieza already being placed on the rock, it really invokes a feeling of superiority and strength. Also, clouds of dust come up on both sides that further aid in drawing your eye throughout the scene. The next shot is likewise the same in terms of good framing. There is a clear path the viewer's eye is drawn through, aided again by elements like the dust parting to the side, which also assists in emphasizing the threat this small but deadly attack holds. And the fact that it is also red, which is a color commonly associated with danger, further works in this regard. And lastly, the area in which the cast occupy is painted with darker values that somewhat contrast with the lighter values of the background art around Frieza from the previous scene and the beam here. Then we get quite a interesting change in the writing, with Piccolo leaping in front to save Goku, whereas in the manga he just gets hit and sort of nudges Goku as he falls down. And honestly, I'm fine with this addition as it shows how far Piccolo has come and that not only did he sacrifice himself for Gohan, but now for the warrior who he once was a bitter rival with. And from a visual standpoint, the composition of this frame as he is being struck in particular is quite dramatic and impactful. Thereafter, there are some more filler scenes, the first being of Gohan as he expresses his sadness for Piccolo's supposed death. The character art throughout this portion by Lighter is fine, however this shot of Gohan does look somewhat unappealing, but isn't a deal breaker by any means. And soon after, for the next filler scene, we switch to King Kai talking to the remaining warriors about Piccolo's death, animated by an unknown key animator this time, and there isn't anything that noteworthy in this portion. The artwork, while not overly refined, still is decent, but I guess one small criticism is that they hold this final frame for about 3 or 4 seconds without any movement or dialogue, and it just comes off somewhat awkward. Although at least in the dub they added some grunting effects, so there isn't really that much of that silence. Now, I wouldn't say that these 2 extra scenes were necessary. It does add emphasis and further drama around Piccolo, which I think works fine. Although I will make some minor notes in regards to some small errors and inconsistencies that I never picked up before despite watching the series through multiple times. And firstly, the color of Piccolo's blood changes back to red, which was the original color in Dragon Ball before later changing to purple in Dragon Ball Z. So was this deliberate or forgetfulness? I honestly can't say. And secondly, for whatever reason, the sky in this scene I just showed of King Kai is a dark purple, actually very similar to the sky's color for King Kai's planet in Super, oddly enough, but then switches to the more common lilac pink before switching back again to the purple. And I mean, I actually like the vibe the purple gives, but it still was nonetheless a random change. Then there was a small mistake within the photography stage in regards to the layering of the cells, where due to Piccolo's cell being placed slightly too high, you can see Gohan's feet below him. Then lastly, even though Frieza shoots a key attack ball thing, I don't know what it is, it turns into a beam when it strikes Piccolo. Now, while perhaps odd, these were the type of inconsistencies that weren't jarring and were ones that you would only typically notice if someone pointed them out, and like I said, I was never really aware of them prior to making this video, so I wouldn't deem them as an issue. But moving on, we return back to Namek with some nice framing again, like with this high angle shot of Gohan here, which paired with his body language give the message of powerlessness, and the shot thereafter with a low angle shot of Krillin and with the camera placed behind Piccolo, providing some extra depth. Followed after, Goku's rage begins to boil with a very well drawn close-up that is quite reminiscent of the manga. However, I have no idea who the animator is again. My guess through simple process of elimination is perhaps Noriko Ichibashi due to every other key animator's cut on this episode being confirmed. But soon after, we get another great close-up of Frieza, surprisingly by Kano again, with some of his previous scenes being reused thereafter. Then Krillin is struck by the attack and we have some extra additions like Krillin struggling rather than just being suspended mid-air, which adds to the desperation and the air of tension. Then he is shot up through the sky, and there is some really dramatic and intense character art working well in sequence with the tone right before his death. And the following effects work looks excellent, carrying over many similarities from the manga in terms of the shapes and the thick dark outlines. Then thereafter, the following shots are also very faithful to the source material, both not only in the framing but also the character art itself. And there is a final filler scene of King Kai, which was just entirely reused animation. However, it's short-lived, so it's rather harmless in the grand scheme of things. But overall, Krillin's death here is handled very well, even though there are some more changes with the writing, as in the manga, Frieza doesn't shoot any specific attack, but rather just kind of grabs him sort of, then kills him, whereas the anime opted to instead have this small ball of energy enter into his body, then Frieza controls that before exploding it from the inside, which is certainly more brutal, and if anything, it elevates the tension, so no complaints. And then finally, Masaki Sato steps into the ring at long last with this superb Frieza. The atmosphere also begins to build with the background becoming suddenly darker in value. At this point, Goku is totally ignoring Frieza's taunts as his rage begins to swell, with some interesting effects somewhat like heat waves filling the air. Once again, Sato's Frieza is perfect. He truly captures that sinister look, and his detailed shading adds a lot of depth. Yamauchi's choice to also add in a long shot of the small island they are on communicates a nice sense of scale, and utilizing elements like lightning, which is darting all around, as well as crashing directly behind Goku, it creates a seriously intense atmosphere. And this only increases as the ground around begins to break, and you get this really cool pan up with those heat effects and extra addition of having his hair rise up in his base form with lightning crashing all around. Furthermore, the values of both the skin tones and the background further darken as well, with the shading becoming also more detailed. This creates a clear contrast to the previous scenes, again intertwining perfectly with the tone and build-up. There was also the choice to have the Super Saiyan hair fade in and out, clearly communicating a struggle he was going through. Then thereafter there are some repeated frames and we get an intense close-up as his pupils suddenly whiten and he explodes in rage, with this really smooth transition of the hair shifting colors into that gold tone. Sato's art here is very expressive, and the choice to include all those roughly drawn veins just further adds to it. Then we get an intense glowing aura. The posture also indicates a complete change in attitude as well, with that iconic pose following thereafter, and that main sequence ends there. In conclusion, the majority of those additions were not in the source material and therefore truly speaks to the skill of the staff. It additionally gave further emphasis in communicating a struggle to reaching it, which is another factor that made it so memorable. Now finally up to the remade scene from the special. So again, starting off from Krillin with the character art looking more polished and refined. However, it isn't as expressive, still it's decent enough. Then we immediately see Frieza. Now I would still choose Kano's take on Frieza if I had to pick between both versions, but I still quite like this one as well. And almost instantaneously, he shoots Piccolo right through the chest, with the background changing to black with red splatters, framing the importance of this moment. The storyboard for this portion is pretty much one-to-one with the manga, as is the pacing being much more snappy. However, in the next part for Krillin's death, they sort of go for a balance between the two, sticking with to the gestures and framing from the manga for Frieza, but then taking a page out of the original episode, with that small key attack being what kills him ultimately. Then as he flies in the air, the character art, much like the original, is quite expressive, and the effects work is excellent. I especially like the colors used in this scene, and Yamamoto's choice to darken the background gradually as the explosion takes place. Again, a simple but effective way to frame the moment. And the choice to add a soft yellow light additionally does a good job of making the characters feel further part of the surrounding environment. One minor nitpick though is something in both the remake and the original, is that the shots of Goku's reaction as Krillin is in the air, in terms of composition, is okay, but it's nowhere near as dynamic and interesting as Toriyama's original panel. And it's sort of strange since Yamamoto does make quite a consistent effort to match the storyboard to the manga, so it's a little odd he didn't go with it here. But moving forward to the transformation itself, much like Yamauchi, the sky turns dark, creating a noticeable shift in the tone. The rocks begin to rise as his hair switches colors, giving the sense of a struggle, much like the original. Then thereafter we get this wallpaper-worthy shot with the shapes of aura looking quite stylish. In the following shot we get some more excellent detailed character art by Takahashi, who, at least going off this Gengar, seemed to have been quite a model for this cut. Then something sort of clicks and he transforms. And finally we get the pan up of that iconic shot, and it ends there. Now, I would still choose the original due to the superb build-up and the art style, but I have to compliment Yamamoto here for trying to strike a balance between the source material and the original anime adaptation. And honestly, I believe he succeeded. You can see this in how the transformation is extended more than in the manga, and you have similar elements like the rocks rising and the switching between the two hair colors. Again, something exclusive to the anime, but at the same time still sticking fairly close to the original panel composition and the final moment of the transformation itself. However, ironically enough, by following the manga, it kind of led to the exclusion of that final powerful yell right before he transforms, and its absence can really be felt. But regardless, in overall terms of storyboarding and direction, Yamamoto did quite a good job. The main negative is more so down to his work as supervisor, as his art style dominates this special with all the facial highlights and his style of shading. Although with the color palette, it is probably more somewhat subjective to taste, as from a general standpoint, a lot of the skin tones, like for Krillin as an example, lean towards more warmer toned, and if you remove the highlights, don't feel plastic and dull at all. Or Goku's gi, which is quite vibrant. But regardless, especially when it comes to the skin tones, I still prefer the older palette with the pinkish tones. And a final mention before ending this video, although the main intent here was to analyze both of these adaptations in the visuals department, not in terms of voice acting or the soundtrack, I will note that while the specific track that played as he transformed in the Japanese version wasn't bad at all in isolation, I really wish they had composed a unique track for this special moment like they did with Gohan's transformation. And I know that praising the American soundtrack is Quite uncommon and almost a taboo it seems at times amongst the hardcore fandom, but I can't lie, the Falconer soundtrack nailed it here. The atmosphere it also builds is just the icing on the cake to this iconic moment. But with that, the video is concluded. Thank you, especially if you stuck around to the end. I did not expect that first part going over the original to be as long. When watching the remake in the TV special, it was rather short, so I realized that starting from Krillin's first reaction to seeing Frieza would be a nice place to start, and so thus I would have to begin from the same place in the original episode. But I completely underestimated how much filler there was until like the transformation, and even considered cutting that part out of the video. But I've had so many comments asking the videos to be longer, and I had already put a lot of effort into writing that, so I kept it all there. But anyway, thank you for your support once again. I truly appreciate it, and I'll see you later.